Hi, I'm Lizzie.
I'm Brenda.
And welcome to
Small Step Society.
This is episode 1, Embodying Empathy.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So every week, we're going to have a little segment that we like to call Song of the Moment, because it's whatever we're listening to right this second if we open Spotify or Apple Music. Yeah. And that way you guys can get a little playlist by the end of the season, and it'll have a diverse range of music because we have very different music tastes.
And get to know us a little more by our music tastes as well.
Yeah. So what are you listening to right now?
I am listening to Sparks Fly by Taylor Swift.
Classic.
I know. I love her.
Yeah.
She's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I am listening to Sons and Daughters by Almond Brown and Liz Lawrence. Yeah, it's a very little, it's a nice song to blast, I think. Maybe not.
Let's dive right into empathy.
Okay, so I think we should start out by defining empathy.
So the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines empathy as the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another.
Mm-hmm. So I actually have a fun fact related to the definition. So in psychology, empathy is defined as an ability to understand and experience someone else's feelings and to adopt someone else's viewpoint. But the fun fact is empathy comes from the German word Einfühlung, which I'm definitely pronouncing wrong. But it means to project into or projecting into. So that's kind of why empathy is, I guess, commonly defined as like an ability to place yourself in someone else's shoes. You're projecting into their body or their mind to really understand where they're coming from. So I think we can start out with a common little debate that people have, empathy versus sympathy.
Yeah.
I feel like in elementary school, that's something that's taught, like they have little like mini lessons on that. Yeah, so I almost think that empathy isn't really, it's not something that should be versus sympathy, because they're very similar. Empathy, I think, is just like a deeper form of sympathy.
Yes.
Because sympathy, you maybe like listen to someone's feeling. They're like, oh, I'm sad. And you just listen to it. But empathy is like, you go out of your way to do something to make them feel better, or you really, feel what they're feeling in your heart because you felt the same way. Obviously, on a deeper level than just the word sad.
Yes. I guess as we were talking about like the deeper part of empathy, a lot of people say that there's 3 different types of empathy, which are cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. Yeah. So the Inc. magazine defines cognitive empathy as the ability to understand how a person feels and what they might be thinking. So I think this is the most common definition of empathy that we hear and see all the time. And cognitive empathy makes us better communicators.
So is cognitive empathy just like thinking about it more intellectually?
I think so.
I guess that makes sense because cognitive, like brain.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, emotional empathy is the ability to share the feelings of another person. So this helps you build emotional connections with others.
So that's more the embodiment portion of empathy.
Yes. Like the
you really,
deeper, quote unquote, deeper part of
like
empathy.
you take their feelings onto yours.
And then compassionate empathy, I feel like, is very similar to sympathy in a way, where compassionate empathy goes beyond simply understanding, and it like motivates you to do something, to take action, and to help however you can. But I feel like a lot of people think like, if you're sympathetic, you want to help them.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
can see what you mean. Yeah, I think like, the love languages.
Yes.
Like one of them is
acts of service.
acts of service. Yes, exactly. I think that would come under compassionate empathy because, like, say you're feeling down and I want you to feel better, but I don't know how to do that. I'd give you a card.
Right.
Something like that.
Or like treat them to something they like eating or a little walk outside. Yeah, we can give you a little example on the differences of empathy and even sympathy as well.
Okay. So let's imagine that you have a friend who has recently lost a close family member or friend, whatever it may be. So if you were just expressing sympathy, you would maybe do that in saying, oh, I'm sorry for your loss, or maybe sending a card expressing that in words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But showing empathy takes more time and effort. So the cognitive empathy, like you would imagine what the person is going through.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional is you try to connect with that person through an experience that you had, that you know the feeling of like sorrow and pain.
Mm-hmm.
And compassionate empathy would be things such as providing a meal. We're providing a ride for their children. We're whatever to take one thing off of their plate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess my confusion here would come from what is the difference between cognitive and emotional? Like, how do you show cognitive empathy? Because it seems to just be more of an internal process.
I wonder if it is just an internal process. Because I think there is a difference between cognitive and emotional. Because some things you can't find an experience that you've gone through to really relate.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, that would be the cognitive part where you try to imagine, you try your best to feel what they're going through.
Yeah, I think another way to say it would be, you know how people have different communication styles. So if, say you know your friend is more of someone who just wants you to, like they just want to rant to you and they just want you to listen. I think that'd be very compatible with someone who shows cognitive empathy because you don't really show it outwardly, but like you're there to listen and you're there to like take it in. Whereas emotional empathy is a little more external. So maybe they want to know that someone else is out there feeling like them. So you can tell them about how you lost a close family member or you lost a friend and how you got through it. Or maybe don't even say how you got through it. Just, you know, tell them that they're not alone. Like everyone's felt that way.
But in a nice way, yes.
Not that everyone has felt that way, but that it's a part of life. It's a very fine line.
It is a very fine line.
I think my next question would be, how do you empathize with others?
That's a very good question. Out of the three empathy that we talked about, the cognitive, emotional, and compassionate, I'm not sure. I like to think I'm like a cognitive empathizer, but I'm not sure. What do you think?
I think you're compassionate for sure.
Compassionate
You're
one?
very much like an acts of service person. Like one time I don't know what happened. Maybe I was sick. Maybe, I don't know. Something happened. And then the next day you got me cheese sticks because I told you that I wanted them. That's like my prime example. I'm like, oh yeah, that was empathy. But I think I would rank you like compassionate. I mean, I wouldn't really know if you're cognitive.
Oh, that's true. Because it is more internal.
But I'd say compassionate. I think you're least emotional.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you try to be like, do you think about it? Like if someone's telling you something like they're going through, do you think about it? You're like, oh, I need to show empathy.
I feel like when they're telling me something, I'm like, how would I respond? Like, in what way should I respond to show that I do care that they're telling me this?
Yeah.
So I guess that is empathy.
Yeah.
Right? But
I think that is the cognitive portion of it. And I mean, it's not like you really need to be labeling them because they're all very
But I think the other thing is for the emotional part, we're a little bit young in our life stage to have experienced like a variety of different events.
Yeah, I think it's harder to relate.
Really like pull out one of your experiences to relate, especially because all my friends, I feel like at college, we come from very different backgrounds. So I think that part's a little harder.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I do, like, I feel like out of the three, I'm most emotional empathy. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's also because, like, even if I don't necessarily relate, I think I'll, like, draw on experiences that I've heard from people I know, you know? So, like, if you're going through something that I haven't gone through personally, maybe I'll say, oh, I know someone who did. This is how they got through it, or this is how they felt.
Right. So I feel like that part's kind of like cognitive, but extrapolated into emotional.
Yeah. You know what we haven't talked about?
What?
Why empathy even is important.
Yeah. So for like the most obvious reason, I think, is connection. Empathy really allows you to connect with people, relate to them, have like conversations that are fruitful.
Yeah, I think maybe part of what distinguishes like not an acquaintance, like even just a friend from like a really good friend is being able to have that emotional connection with them and being able to be there for them when it really matters. And so I think empathy is important. Like people want to feel understood, and if they can feel understood when they're in your presence, it's always gonna strengthen your relationship. But I think there's also like a biological basis for it. You know, like at its foundation, empathy can just, you know, save your life. Like, have you ever heard like the thing where if this is going to get really morbid really quickly.
Oh no.
But like if someone's holding you at gunpoint, let's say, you start telling them facts about yourself because it makes them
you
see you as a human.
yourself. Yeah.
So I think like that's an example of empathy where if someone's able to connect with you, they're going to see you as more than just a thing that exists. Like it's just an object in your environment.
Yeah. Another example would be like if someone's running, yelling at you, like screaming their head off with a face of terror, then you see that face and you register, oh, something's wrong, and you run with them or you like move out of the way. And that's like a more like immediate, I mean the gunpoint one is immediate too, but
yeah. I think in one of my psychology classes we were talking about how humans like all over the world have like these 5 basic emotions. Don't ask me to list them, I don't remember, but like one of them's like happiness, sadness, like no matter what, anywhere you go, whether you go to New Guinea or the US or Mexico, that's not very far from the US, you know what I mean, anywhere in the world, even if like a society hasn't been modernized, we all have those same 5 basic expressions, which I think is a fundamental part of being human, and so it's a fundamental part of creating connections with humans. My point being, what you were talking about expressing emotions in your face and someone showing empathy and receiving that is like a universal thing. So at its very core, I think survival, like the importance of empathy for survival and the importance of empathy for connection are very interconnected.
I agree. Now that we've talked about the different types of empathy and why empathy is so important in our like daily lives, I think it would be beneficial to talk about how to build empathy and how like how we can get better in empathy. In a sense.
I mean, it's a very important skill as we just established. So I think let's start with cognitive empathy.
Yes. For cognitive empathy, I imagine a filing cabinet in my head. And there's a folder for every person. And you have all these information about this person in a folder. And you store it away safely. And to build upon the cognitive empathy, you open that filing cabinet, remember what was in it, and make educated guesses from the information that you have gathered from getting to know that person.
That's a really good analogy. So, thanks. But what do you do? What do you do with that information? Like, how do you use it? Or does that go into the emotional and into the compassionate empathy?
I think it goes into emotional and compassionate because once you know the person enough to know, like, this is why they're feeling and, like...
This is why they're feeling that way. I think to build upon that, when you have cognitive empathy, it can also strengthen your connection because then, like, you know better how someone functions or how their mind works, and you're able to, like, play into that. So if, like... when you have all the information about someone, you know, oh, they were hurt by, like, they told you about how they were hurt by their friend maybe saying something about, I don't know, their hair, let's say. You now know not to, like, broach that subject with them and not to go into that territory. So I think that's, like, part of that.
Like, you can distinguish what is really important to them and that could really hurt them. Versus what could be taken as a joke.
Yeah, especially when you have friendship, like, I think... as you build that friendship, you get more comfortable with someone. And so, like, you start making jokes or, like, you start, I don't know, just, like, there's, like, good-natured fun, obviously. But now you know what not to touch.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's... cognitive empathy is more like it's not, like, a situational thing. It's, like, a long-term...
Yes. It's like a database.
Yeah. It's kind of creepy.
My bad.
Just kidding. So next, emotional empathy.
So the goal of emotional empathy is to successfully really share the feeling, to feel how they're feeling,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I think first you listen judgment free,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't interrupt, and you don't give them advice, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Mhm.
You don't like minimize their feelings by saying, oh,
Everyone feels that way.
right, everyone feels that way, I've been through that,
You'll get over it.
right.
Like, that's the worst phrase to say to anyone.
But instead you could say, oh, I'm so sorry, I've gone through a similar situation and I totally understand how you felt.
Yeah, and I think this is something important that I learned like a couple of years ago. When someone is ranting to you or someone is coming to you with some kind of problem they're having, the first question you should always ask them is, do you want me to just listen, or do you want me to give you advice?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if they just want you to listen, cognitive empathy.
Yes.
If they want you to give advice,
Emotional. Mm-hmm.
compassionate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like really focus on understanding why they're feeling that way.
Yeah, I think a good part of emotional empathy is validating their feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you think they're in the wrong, like, I don't know, like if they had an argument with someone and they feel hurt, but they're the one who's doing the hurting too, you can call that out. You just need to be mindful of, really put yourself in their shoes and feel, oh, if I were in their situation, I felt like I was wronged, but I was also not being nice to the other person. How would I deal with that? Or how would I want someone to tell me? And then use that information to inform your choice about what you say to them or how you help them.
Right. Even in that situation where someone is hurt and they are just ranting to you, I think you can still validate how they're feeling, really understand and be there for them. And then once everything's a little more calm, more settled down, bring it back up maybe and explain, hey, I think I do understand how you're feeling, but if I was the opponent, the other person, I would feel this way. What do you think? And you could always have like a more civil conversation.
Yeah. And I think you just need to get your tone right.
Yes. Don't be accusatory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For compassion and empathy, it is very similar to acts of service. So I think to build it, you can ask yourself, what helped me when I was in a situation? What would help me if I was in this situation? And you could suggest that option, or you could do that for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, for example, let's say someone's feeling down, once again. You say, oh, if I were in their shoes, I'd want a distraction, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to, like, go out for a walk, like, get some fresh air. And you suggest it. You're like, hey, maybe we should go for a walk. We can talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also get some fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe let's go to dinner,
Mm-hmm.
actually. Let's just have a good time.
Yeah.
But of course, you need to be aware of the fact that just because it worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for them. Like,
yes.
We're all different people.
Yes.
Which is why we need to make sure that we understand not only what we would want from this situation, but what they would want.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the cognitive empathy comes in. So it's kind of a full circle moment. Yeah. But for the compassion and empathy, it'll never hurt to just offer or ask.
Yeah.
And they can say no. They can say, I'm not sure if that'll work for me.
Yeah. And I think it's also difficult if, like, you keep offering things to do for them, but they keep saying no. You're like, oh, let's go for a walk. Let's get your mind off. They're like, no. Let's get some food. No. But you need to just be aware, like, you just can't be offended by that, which I know is really difficult, but you just can't be offended by that, because think about it. If you were in their shoes, you would probably want to dwell on it. You would probably say, I don't want to go for a walk. I just want to sit here and cry, or I just want to sit here and think about it.
Yeah,
and
so patience always comes in handy as well.
Yeah, maybe just sit with them then. Maybe that's what they want.
Or maybe they just want to be left alone. Yeah.
Who knows?
Mm-hmm. But those are a couple of ways where we could always work on empathy.
Mm-hmm. On the flip side, I know we've been saying empathy is good, have empathy, but sometimes you can have too much empathy.
Yes.
It's a heavy weight to bear,
Mm-hmm.
Because a huge part of empathy is taking on someone else's feelings, really understanding it, putting it in your own soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it gets a little too much for you. So you need to create boundaries. If you're just not in the right mindset to be hearing about someone else's problems, manage that. You can tell them in a nice way, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's really important to do because empaths
Mm-hmm.
empaths are really easily taken advantage of because
Because they always seem so understanding
yeah.
and always willing to be there for you. So I think that's why they are more easily taken advantage of.
Yeah. I feel like I'm kind of that way. Like I don't know how to say no, I don't want to hear about your problem, because I feel like if I were in that situation, like that would hurt. Like that would hurt me so bad if someone was like, I can't listen to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
I am still trying to figure out both how to say I can't deal with this right now,
Mm-hmm.
and also how to understand when someone says that to me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the excessive empathy also ties really hand in hand with people pleasing.
Yeah.
So, which is a whole nother topic,
Mhm.
but
And like I think a lot of the time you don't even notice that you're doing this to
Right.
yourself. Like I don't think I've really thought about it too much until we like started thinking about empathy for this episode.
yes. Mm-hmm.
But you just really need to practice self-awareness. Like notice how you're getting absorbed in other people's feelings, and insulate yourself from that. So maybe go inside, like go sit in your room for some time. Go do things for yourself before you do things for others, because otherwise you're going to end up hurting them.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's better for you and that other person to already have that sense of understanding of boundaries and knowing when is the right time to go to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise they'll get used to you always being there for them, being like their rock.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you leave, like that would be crushing.
Yeah. I think that brings up another concept that I had in my mind is filling your cup. And if you're filled up, then you can always fill other people's cup as well. But it just means that you need someone that you can also turn to, so you're not always the top of like pouring yourself out to other people and now you have nothing left.
Yeah, I think I actually saw some graphic or I don't know on the internet, and it was saying that you also need to understand that like people's cups are different sizes,
Mm-hmm.
which is I never thought about it like that. But like someone might only have a quarter cup, like that's how far their emotional capacity goes,
Mm-hmm.
and someone might have a whole cup. And if you're the person who has a whole cup, it is so hard to deal with the fact that someone only has a quarter cup, because it means like there's just less of them to give to other people.
Yeah.
And so when you're on the receiving end of empathy, it can be really difficult, because you're like, why does this person not care about me? Why does this person not love me as much as I love them? But they do, with all of
their might.
yeah. It's just they just have less.
Yeah.
Like that's just how they are.
You know.
And
I have
vice
seen
versa.
that. I've seen that too.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a great graphic.
Yeah.
Because it like puts everyone into perspective.
Mhm.
And you're like, oh, I gave my all, which could be a full cup, and I only received half a cup.
But that's all they had to give.
Right. So that's it's really hard to like be mindful of that. But once I think it's just a reminder. I just
Yeah.
need to be reminded.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we always, like, people are always talking about, like, how everyone's different, everyone's diverse. But I never thought about what that means for,
Emotional capacity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. It's really interesting.
Yeah. It is very interesting.
Anyway. Yeah. So, back to over empathy. I think, TLDR, you need to show understanding, but you can delay the conversation. Say, I understand what you're going through. I need some time to like maybe they're just telling you a lot of information. Maybe you just need time to process it. So tell them that. Say, I understand what you're going through and I want to be there for you. Just give me some time to process what you told me, and I'll get back to you
Yes.
in 5 to 10 business days. Okay. However long it takes.
Yes.
On the other hand, there's also some people might have problems with receiving empathy. Like I know sometimes I'll be like, oh, this person is doing this for me because they feel bad for me. But no, they maybe just have a way of showing empathy that it's not what you're used to.
And back to the cup graphic with the 1 cup and like the quarter cup. I know that if you only have a quarter cup and you get poured a full cup, you're overwhelmed. And you're like, oh, I don't know what to do with all this.
Yeah.
But on the other side, like if you have the full cup and they give you their all like quarter cup, and you're like, wow, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's when you need to be like, they're trying their best. Like, you need to know, like, everyone is trying their best.
Yeah. And a lot of people, like, they just don't know how to deal with emotions. Like, it's a really hard thing. Like,
It is.
you can be 60, still don't know how to deal with emotions.
It's
I wouldn't know, though.
It's hard to identify emotions.
Mhm.
Personally, I struggle with knowing what I'm feeling in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I, like, go on for years not knowing what I'm feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, emotions are so complex. Like,
Yes.
and it's also harder because humans aren't the most direct people.
Mm-hmm.
Humans aren't the most direct people. Humans aren't the most direct. Like, you know, it's like the classic example. Someone says, "How are you doing?" Or, "How are you really feeling?" You're like, "I'm fine."
Yes.
Like, maybe they're not. Maybe they really are fine. Maybe they're not. Like,
Mhm.
you don't know. And it's so hard to receive empathy, show empathy, do any of that because you're just trying. Everyone's just trying their best to be emotionally aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, in relation to all of this, in my little research on empathy, I found a quote from Pope John Paul II.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes essentially, nobody is so poor that they have nothing to give, and nobody is so rich that they have nothing to receive. And so it was this person like talking about what their relationship with their husband is.
Mm.
And so she said, I think it was, I don't know, I don't remember.
The author.
Yeah, the author said, when I share with my husband about my troubles, even though I am hoping to receive empathy from him, I am not so poor that I cannot give him empathy too.
Mm.
So what that basically means is when you're expecting someone to express empathy for you, you also need to empathize with them. So this person said, as I listen to his advice and solutions for me, I also hear his feeling of frustration and helplessness for not being able to rescue me. So, like, a lot of going back to the fact that people are just trying their best, you need to understand that if they're getting frustrated with you, or if they're I don't know, like just getting frustrated, getting upset by the way you're feeling, it's not necessarily a direct it's not directly caused by you. It's not an attack on you. It's an attack on the situation because they care for you so much that they just want to make you feel better and they're not able to do it. And it's so stressful. It's a hard responsibility to have. But yeah, I just really like that quote because it shows that empathy is a two-sided street, like two-way street. No matter who's on the receiving end and who's on the giving end, you're both giving and you're both receiving empathy.
That is a really good quote. So clearly we're not experts on empathy, on how to build empathy, what the different concepts of empathy, but
We just wanted to
talk about it.
and give our insight and kind of just show a bunch of converging viewpoints, different perspectives, different aspects of empathy, and maybe you'll relate to something. Maybe you'll take away something from this, but
And
I think if you take away one thing, it would be I never thought that far.
I have something.
Okay.
Personally, this episode talking about empathy was a great reminder for me that, like, the graphic part that just hits so like deeply, that we have different emotional capacities and we need to be aware of that. I just need to remember that they are trying their best and I'm also trying my best, but they're also trying their best.
Yeah. And to go along with that, I think something that I learned is, okay, even if you don't take away like the label, like if you don't remember the labels of compassionate, cognitive, emotional, that doesn't matter. What matters is that if you're struggling with showing empathy, or if you're struggling with understanding why someone thinks that they're showing you empathy when you think they're not, just understand there are so many different types of empathy that can be shown. And you just need to understand that they're trying their best.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all it is. Like, they're just trying their best. Yeah. Everyone's trying their best.
Yeah. So I hope this episode was, I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think it was. I thought it was
I
interesting.
really liked talking about empathy.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know.
I like having these conversations.
And I think it'll make me a better empath.
Yeah.
Or, like, set boundaries if you feel like you are an over-excessive empath.
Yeah, I think it's just being able to understand and really delve into, like, the different intricacies of empathy just makes you a better human, really, because it's not even just a a question about friendship. It's also like, that's like something that can be shown in the workplace and in school, in any relationship, really.
And you're trying to understand. You're trying your best to improve, to understand. And that just makes you immediately
10 times cooler.
Yeah, 10 times cooler. So, yeah.
Well, if that's all.
We'll see you next Sunday.
Yeah, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere you can find podcasts except where you can't.
And follow us on Instagram for events, for updates.
For little previews, maybe.
Yes, episode previews.
At Small Step Society Pod. Mm-hmm. And we'll see you next time.
week.
Bye!
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.